The other two categories that we really need to discuss when talking about requirements are non-functional versus functional requirements. So what is the difference between these two? Well, the functional requirements are requirements and specifications pertaining to the function of the program. That's the key word here. It's the function of the program here. So what we're talking about is what should the system do? In the end, what should the system be able to accomplish? We're building a form. We go down the list of the things the form should be able to do. It should collect data. It should send data. It should protect against input. It should do this. It should do that. Now, non-functional are the requirements and specifications on what goals should be met. For example, security. What should the form data be encrypted like? Or cost, or time constraint maybe. How long should the form take to submit? So maybe the form should submit data to the server, and down here in the non-functional requirement, on top of that, it should submit data within 500 milliseconds. Let's say that. That is not something that the system overall does, so therefore it's not functional. It's something that is a constraint. It's something that needs to happen with the functional. Down here we can take a look at an example that we went over earlier. So remember the send AES 256 encrypted form data, yada yada. We can break that down and sort of break these into functional and non-functional. So the first one is send form data from front end to back end server. What is that doing? Well, it's a function. It's taking data and it's sending them. It's defining what exactly our product should do. And so for this one, we're talking about a functional requirement. Now, the bottom one is a non-functional. You can see I've taken out the whole encryption part of this to sort of break them up. And you'll see that whenever you write requirements, things get a little wishy-washy. You might actually combine two, and this isn't an exact science. However, going through it, you might be able to knock out some of these things and figure, wait, we should put these in two separate categories sort of things. Anywho, the bottom part, the encryption part, is the non-functional. The non-functional, a lot of times it's referred to as NFR, non-functional requirement, and this is FR. A lot of times I take off the R's though, non-functional, functional. But anyway, this is not something that the program should do. It's not an operation. It's not something that the user is doing that, if he can't do it, then there's something wrong with the product. It's a requirement. It's something that should be happening with the functional requirement. So the functional requirement is sending the form data, and then the non-functional requirement is that it should be encrypted, that it should only take 500 milliseconds, that it should send it to 3 different servers before it gets to our server for some reason. It's the non-functional behind it. Now, non-functional also has a couple of different little categories. And what these categories are basically some of the different sort of tiers of non-functional. And you'll start to understand them just a little bit here more. So the first one is the product requirement, something that the product must do. Again, it's not something the product is, acting with the environment with. It's not changing something. This is just a way that the product should be designed, a way that it should integrate with the world. And let's say that you have a client that is, maybe he's leasing out the ability to create this software, but at the end he wants to maintain it himself. Therefore, he needs it coded in a specific language, Java. There's no talk of design here. There's no back and forth. This is a requirement. It's something he says the program must be coded in Java. That's it. There's no discussion on this point. Therefore, that becomes a requirement. Now, is it the way the problem functions? For example, we could create a web page that has a form. We could create it in Java or CSS and HTML and JavaScript, or maybe even Python or Ruby. We can create it in all these different ones. So it doesn't matter what the coding language is. That's not part of the function of the program. That is a non-functional requirement. It's something we have to do, but the program doesn't react because of it. Therefore, we have this non-functional, and it's a product requirement. Then we get into organizational requirements, and this comes down to usually the policies and the standards and the styles and the rules of the organization you're working in and with. So for example, maybe the organization you're working with is a military organization, and they say anytime data changes hands, it has to be encrypted. Doesn't matter if it's internal or external, it has to be encrypted. Therefore, one of our organizational requirements would be the product data must be encrypted by AES 256. And again, I use this all the time. Just because it's an easy encryption algorithm. Of course, military standard, there's probably going to be something way, way stronger, but doesn't matter. That's just the technology here. What I'm talking about is that they're telling us we have to use this, or maybe it's our own company policy. Whatever it is, it's not talking about the function of the program and how it interacts with the world around it. It's talking about how it should be developed and what should happen within the program. And then finally, for the organizational, we have the project will be developed using the Scrum methodology. We're in a company that uses Scrum, and there's no arguing about that. There's no talk about this. So when we get to the design phase, that isn't a question. That's not something that a bunch of engineers come together and come up with. Therefore, it's a requirement. We're in a company, it uses Scrum, therefore that's a requirement. And it's not talking about how the program interacts with the world, which I keep saying, but I'm trying to drill this home. Therefore, it is a non-functional requirement. Then finally, we get into the external requirements. And this is just something whenever we're talking about external things that sort of push onto our product. And this can be external laws or regulations or even trends that we need to follow. And therefore, what we have is we have these that come together into these requirements. For example, let's say that the EU, the European Union, has some law, the Freedom Act, Article 1, Section 2, that states that all data must be using this sort of encryption, SSL encryption between data points or whatever. That must be a requirement, because if we're going to design a piece of software that we're selling in the EU, it's got to fit that. Otherwise, no one's going to buy it. And if they do, we'll get sued by the government and our product will be basically a liability to us instead of an asset. And we don't want that. So that's an external requirement. There might be also certain trends. Maybe there's a certain security trend or a certain trend like the web page must be able to load within 2 seconds. A lot of people will actually leave web pages if they don't load within 2 seconds, if it doesn't show something. That's not exactly a law or regulation, but that's a trend. That's something we should follow. That's something that should be implemented into our program if we want it to be competitive in the marketplace. So that we could put down here in external requirements as well. But that is the last classification of requirements here. We got those non-functional and we got those functional requirements. Just remember, a functional requirement is how the program interacts with the world around it. It's changing something, it's moving something. The user is able to do something because of that requirement. While the non-functional requirements are the things that the program should be able to do. They're the things that not necessarily interact with the world, but they constrain us. They make us have to do something. Therefore, they have to be put in the requirements document.